Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Festival of Learning and Teaching. Great to see another packed house for today's theme on assessment and feedback. I hope many of you were able to attend yesterday. We had some absolutely fabulous sessions that I think actually provided a really nice transition in from exploring discovery-based learning and what that looks like, and some examples, and of course on the ever hot topic of AI and ChatGPT and how we integrate that. And what I got out from some of the sessions was a really interesting approach to kind of think about when we think about how we use some of these tools and ways when we think about learning. Obviously, what that automatically means is that we need to assess our students differently, and how we feed back to them about their learning changes when we move from traditional ways of teaching to more discovery-based learning, because automatically it means the assessment should start to look a bit more like the learning that they experience. A great presentation from the business school about some really kind of grown-up ways to integrate AI into the classroom. So not be scared of it, not run away from it, but actually start to think about how we do, this is going to be my new favorite phrase, prompt engineering. So how we actually teach students to use prompts. And I loved this idea that you might, at the end of an assignment, almost have a list of references and a list of prompts that you went through. And whether in the future AI might be able to kind of spit out a list of the prompts that went into a final output. And that is almost something that could be assessed or considered, or for students to reflect upon. And I think that gives us some exciting ways to kind of think of assessment, not in this kind of arms race of how do we make sure students aren't cheating, to much more how is it integrated into the learning experience. And then at the end of the day, for those of you who are lucky enough to stick around, there was an absolutely fascinating presentation from colleagues in the medical school walking through VR cardiac arrest branching scenarios. I got really stressed. My heart rate went up. I was being forced on the spot to make decisions in a trauma ward. The patient's heart was not beating. And I felt really scared. I thought I need to be doing a much more sedate job than this. But it really gave an idea of thinking so clearly about things that students needed to know to be able to, be good doctors going forward, and things you can't teach them in the classroom very well. And actually how in that case, the kind of digital way of students engaging with things was a way for them to have an experience, albeit in a simulated environment, that could help them. So their first experience of that was not a patient on a trolley with their heart not beating, but to kind of get exposure to that and have some experience of what that looks like. And obviously you can see that automatically changes the way you would assess students when that's what they're learning, when that's how they're teaching, when that's their experience. So please feel free to look in the programs, follow up with colleagues if you want to hear more about this, and make sure to make use of our amazing resource of the Digital Media Lab, who help put a lot of these events together. And for today, we have a very exciting lineup for you. Excitingly, so end the panel at the end of the day with some feedback from students. What I want us to think about today is how assessment and feedback is not just a process we do, but it's something we can think about as something we research, something students experience, something that is ripe for sort of scholarship, to try new things, and for us to reflect on the process of assessment and feedback, rather than being obsessed that it's always going to be right, that it's a kind of constantly evolving process. It's something we keep working on, and really engage our students in that dialogue. I think we don't actually talk to our students enough about the process of assessment and feedback, so that it's actually part of their educational experience, with them getting to reflect in what and how they're learning and why there's an assessment there. I think sometimes a kind of over-focus on rules and regulations makes students forget about the kind of fundamental part. And I think we think they might not think about it enough, but it's actually our responsibility to walk through that with students and help them reflect on that. I'll introduce our keynote panel coming up in a moment. But first, I want to run through a few highlights of the day, just to remind you of what's on offer. We have an introduction to the really fascinating resource called the Anatomy of Assessment. that's been led by colleagues Monica Pazio, Martin Kingsbury, and VJ Timms, putting together a suite of resources with videos, all the detail on how to do authentic assessment at Imperial. So there's no more excuses. Oh, it can't be done. Oh, the rules and regulations don't allow it. These are all assessments that are run by your colleagues with a searchable website. Highly recommend looking into this and seeing what resources are available. More are on the way. And this is kind of going to be an ongoing resource for the college to really have an opportunity to think about assessment differently and see how it has been done differently. So you don't have to kind of say, oh, I don't know if I can do that. It'll show you the kind of wealth of opportunities that are out there for how to do assessment in innovative ways. We'll also hear from some of our Vice Deans of Education today, with Mike Tennant presenting on curiosity differentiated instruction and assessment, and Jason Riley on breaking experimental reports into bite-sized chunks. And these presentations help us think more creatively about how we teach and assess and how we embed this in the students' experience of their assessments and how this helps them manage their workload. And drawing on the themes of technology and assessment and feedback, we have Moira Salsford presenting on multi-mode assessment and feedback, and Peter Johnson will share his experiences of automated feedback on self-study. It's really exciting to see how the automated feedback supports students' reflection and learning. And it almost functions as sort of a proto-AI reflection exercise, sort of integrated with assessment and feedback. And it's really interesting to see how students can kind of do this in their own time, in their own way. And if some of this is designed well, what Peter's really interesting work is, it kind of gives a student a chance to, it's as if they're kind of having a one-on-one conversation with someone who can help them sort of work through the answers, not just get to the right answer, but through that process of learning. And we have a radical take on peer assessment from Isabel Ravi and a presentation on important foundations of feedback literacy from bioengineering, and a session of exciting Ignite presentations. I really got a lot out of the ones yesterday. One involved balloons, which was great fun and a take-home present for some of us. And always a highlight of the festival for me, we'll hear from students at a panel at the end of the day. And we have a Chairs in Life Science PhD student presenting on the relationship to assessment and feedback, and really hear from our students about the role of technology in assessment and feedback. And I think this might be your chance to ask them about how they've been using ChatGPT, what they think about it. Because I think sometimes we get a lot of these sort of myths and discussions about what we think might be happening. So it's kind of, I mean, there's nothing better than actually asking our students how they're engaging with some of these tools when they think about their learning. But first, we'll kick off with a panel featuring three leading thinkers on assessment and feedback. And drawing on the theme of transition, we have Peter Kemp from King's exploring changes in school level assessment and how this impacts on incoming students. And moving on to technology, we have two speakers addressing the hottest topic, AI and ChatGPT. And we have Christine O'Day from Huddersfield Business School, who'll focus on positive potentials in AI and HE. And Ruben Shipway from Plymouth will help us put chatbots in historical perspective and what we can expect going forward. So I want to welcome you all to this really exciting day. And as you see up there, please make use of the technology. And this is the link for you to ask questions throughout. So please, as you have questions that come up as panel members are speaking, please use this resource to start typing them in. Sometimes life does happen on a first come, first served basis, so I encourage you to start to get your questions going, and our keynote panel will be able to reflect on those when they finish speaking. So I'm going to hand over to Jeffrey Vernon to properly introduce and welcome our panel. So I thank you all for your participation today, and I hope you have a great conference.
Everybody, one working? Working. Welcome everybody. This panel doesn't actually have a name, and when I met the panelists before the session, we talked about possible names it could have, and one of the names we came up with was a paradoxical name, So how artificial intelligence could humanize education. So that was one. But other people have suggested to me we could have given it a fun name, like, can I teach my cat Python? Which is the kind of question you could put into a chatbot to see if it knows what its own role is and whether it understands nuance and humour and things of that sort. So the theme of it is about AI and its problems and its opportunities. And I think all of us, since we first got board emails from our colleagues back in November and December saying, have you looked at this? Have you seen what it can do to answer your exam questions? I think some of us have come to realise just how pervasive this is. And in surveys done by JISC and other organisations, students are saying, you guys just don't know how much use we're making of this. We're on ChatGPT all the time. And a recent survey, and I don't know if this was looking at the use of ChatGPT globally, if it was just looking at it in this country, reckoned that there were something like 23,000 questions to ChatGPT per minute every day. So that's a lot of ChatGPT happening, and I know that some of you in the room have been using it as well. So panelist names have all been introduced. You know who they are. And I want to tell you a bit about how the session will work. So each speaker will speak in turn. We'll break after each speaker and we'll take some questions. We can take questions from the floor. We can take questions from the Padlet, but we very much want audience input into this. And if you are typical, you will come in all flavours. Some of you will be enthusiasts, early adopters. Some of you will be the worried well. You know, you think that it's probably a good thing, but you want there to be safeguards and guardrails and things like that. And some of you will say, what's all the fuss about? It's just an autocomplete program. Why are we worrying about all this? So all the voices from whatever perspective will be welcome. The Padlet side is up, so please do put your questions. Of course, as each speaker talks and as we have an interval for questions, the questions will become more wide-ranging, and that's fine. So at the end, we'll have another roughly 30 minutes, I think, for Q&A, and I've no idea what direction that will go. So I would like to ask Christine first, please, to give her presentation. And maybe before we do that, we could all welcome the panel.
About my speaker here, I don't think it's working that well, but I'll try to speak as loud as possible, so you should be able to hear me. So my name is Christine O'Day. I'm from Huddersfield Business School. I'm a subject group lead there for logistics, technology, operations, and analytics. Quite complicated. It's only part of my department. So my teaching specialty is on business analytics. That's where I'm specializing. My research now is moving more towards to AI ED, in particular, AI literacy side of things. So here, what I'm going to cover for today's talk. So, well, I've kind of switched them around. So I'm going to just briefly talk about the technology, trying to make it as simple as possible. And the second page, I've seen some of the questions already people raised just relating to assessments. So these are what I'm going to cover briefly, and we're trying to answer more questions as much as possible. But there are lots of issues I won't be able to squeeze them in, for example, the ethics and how the data side of things work. But these are the questions we're trying to answer later on, if possible. So just to give you a brief timeline in terms of how GPT developed. So as you can see, back to 2018, GPT-1 has already been developed. And there have been a couple of blog posts or papers on GPT-2 around 2019, if you search for those ones. But they never really kind of stirred water as much as until we've seen GPT 3.5. As you can see, GPT-3 is actually went live in 2020, but again, didn't attract that much of attention. So in terms of the training data, GPT-4 again is unknown. So training data for 3 and 3.5 is already quite big, and most of us are experimenting with 3.5 because just nobody really wants to pay that $20 a month, really. But you know, if you got that spare money, I think. And there are also ways of looking at internet. The various of the providers have tried to provide free access to GPT-4, but they often been blocked quite quickly, and also the traffic just means that the site won't sustain for a longer time. So you, by all means, try to find ways of getting to know it. I don't mean illegally, but those ones are kind of legally provided for people. So in terms of the parameters, again, so most of you are familiar with 175 billion, but for the GPT-4, because it's training on live internet-based data, it's quite difficult to estimate the type of the number of parameters. So this is the one I put in. Most of us know GPT 3.5 is trained on pre-2021 data. It stops at September 2021. If you put the question in 3.5, this is what comes out. If you want to ask 3.5 any question relating to GPT-4, I can't answer, simple like that. So it depending on which version students are using. The techniques, the suggestions are mainly based 3.5, I'm afraid. So 4, because we're thinking students are not using 4 yet, but there are always exceptions. So it's about trial error to see what will work, what won't work. So here's my observations just based on teaching. So I've been looking at, because this is part of the teaching that I'm doing for AI and big data side of things. This is what I'm interested in anyway. And I've been in teaching now in higher education for over 20 years now. So these are, again, just my own observation. It's not really referenced, as you can see. So very similar to pandemic, as you can see here, we are, as higher education sector, we're forced to react upon ChatGPT, simply because unlike any other technology, if you think about VLE, you think about any Padlet or Mentimeter, everything else really is university driven. We want students to use it. We want to use it to support our learning teaching. We want to drive the digital transformation for universities. However, for ChatGPT and any other similar tools, it's actually driven purely by students, because students have already started using. So we have to do some things to react to such a change you've never seen before. And also, as you can see, unlike any other tools, AIED has been there for about at least 20, 30 years in terms of publications. But we've always lacking behind the industry. However, for generative AI, you can see the reason it's popular because you don't really need any knowledge. You can simply just use it for doing whatever you're wanting to do. So one thing I want to mention, some of you probably know, QA has published their AI report as well. This site is called the Futurepedia. It's quite simple to search. I haven't provided the link, but you can simply put up in Google for this one. So this is a free kind of a repository housing every single AI tools available. Not every single, I mean, that's exaggerating, but most of the tools people do upload. You have a various of categories, free ones mainly, for different functions. You can see you can actually submit one yourself. And if you keep scrolling down on the right-hand side, you can see the trending AI tools, not just the GPT per se, for image editing, for any other things. So give you a list. If you want to use these tools for learning teaching, trying to invite students to do any peer design in your learning teaching and assessment, this is a quite good repository to explore. Okay, most of them, some of them I tested. I've tested one for drawing. I think it's funded or powered by Google. So you can see how the training data has been kind of populated by various people trying. So lots of different software to explore that way. Technology-wise, again, I won't go into details. There's no point to bore people for that sort of definition. But most people don't really look at what we talk about GPT all the time. But exactly what did it stand for? Many of us actually don't think about it. So as you can see, the three names, we know generative, but the P stands for pre-trained and G for transformer. So unlike many other AI tools, so we know normally machine learning, we do unsupervised and we do supervised training. So the traditional way of looking at machine learning AI tools is we train the computer to actually do particular tasks. For example, you give them a picture of a cat and dog, and that's the traditional one. Like when you do any programming languages learning, you do hello world the first thing. So for for the machine learning, supervised learning, we always often use a cat and dog as examples. So you give machine pictures and dogs or cats, so the machine should be able to identify a new one next time you. Hopefully that's not mine. Okay. But that'll at least keep you awake for a second. So as I said, it's training only for a particular thing so that computers can recognize. So the normal way we're saying the AI or the tools in the machine learning development to train the machine to have the children to about 4 or 5 age sort of intelligent, so they can differentiate different pictures. But for ChatGPT, the large language modeling, the reason it's popular, the reason you feel it can communicate with you is because of what they train based on non-supervised pre-training. So if you're looking at in terms of language modeling, it's not about completing any particular task. It's all about understanding the syntax. So looking at the grammar structure, looking at the meaning being communicated to you. So the structure-wise, the text. So that's how they get to understand what you're trying to ask. So the final thing is transform architecture. So it's mainly about computers trying to mimic how human brains work. We know that's quite hard. For the deep learning, it's one of the hardest things to do. So we are developed slightly better now. So for the ChatGPT, as you can see, they're using a data set called Web Text 2. That's where it trained. If you remember when I looked at the generation of the GPT development, and that was there as well, Web Text 2. So mainly just looking at the structure of the text and looking at the relationship in different languages, dialogues, etc., trying to understand what the text is trying to say. So then I move on to the assessments. So you can see here the word cloud. I did have a look in previous assessment strategies. So most of these ones I capture from your assessment strategies, and I just filled in a couple just to make it look nice. That's all, but I think most of us are familiar with these ones, so I won't stay on this slide for too long. So in terms of high-risk assessments, so the examples I actually get from one of the Australian university here, I think it's called Macquarie, I think. So their learning teaching blog, I highly recommend it, really very good. So if you haven't looked, and I have to say Australian universities quite advanced in this area, AI tools in learning teaching assessments. So this one, the two high risky assessments being identified by them. One is for risk assessment. I know this is one of the main things we do. The other one is non-supervised, invigilated quizzes and tests. So the written test, one question is to ask really is, do we actually have to do it? Do we have any other authentic way of doing it? And I know the concerns. If we have a large cohort, I know the challenges because I'm experiencing and myself. If you've got over 200 cohort, or even some universities got 900, how can you do these things? As I mentioned earlier, it's just a trial error. What works for you, not adding huge amount of extra workload to what you're already doing. So here's the suggestions. If you want to try new things, to test, run your brief, okay, and then to try to use more localized, trying to renew your assessment brief. As I said, it works for GPT 3.54. Yes, it's looking at internet-based data. So you localize the one, your latest one, you might face challenge that way, but it's better than GPT 3.5. 3.5 if you're trying to conquer that sort of challenges. The quizzes as well. If you're not really invigilate, the quizzes can have a lot of problems. So you've got different recommendations. You think about how you word it and invigilate it in the way, and to use more of the images and trying to diagram and trying to rehearse again, run your quiz questions to see whether they work or not. One example, so there are quite a few real life example from that blog. You can have a look. I should have put QR code, sorry about this, but you can search quite simply to search. So one example they gave out, if you use online one, this one actually I spoke to a colleague from Liverpool, John Moore. She's invigilated, non-invigilated the quiz for over 300 students. So she did sort of convert and try this technique in the end. So this one suggestion is you actually, rather than have a digital copy of your quiz and you put them into sort of paper printed, So then they don't actually see questions. They only answer A, B, C, D, and you don't see the question at all. So if they want to copy and paste, they can't really. So they have to type in. So unless you're fast typer like me, I can do blind typing. So quite, I don't think that's the word, but as you probably know, so I don't need to look at screen. So unless you can do the sort of touch typing type of things, most students can't. So that's a way of doing it. So more probably most direct way of kind of setting against this kind of thing if you have to do online kind of quizzes and individualized quizzes. So again, just continue with the same theme. You just have to ask what sort of assessments and what happened if the student can write that assessment, can produce answer using ChatGPT or any other tools. So that's the question you got to ask yourself. And again, different ways. Okay, so you can do open-ended questions, try not to do the fact-checking type of things, using the real-world scenarios, trying to get students to generate questions if you want to do the kind of a student staff co-creation, that sort of thing, and looking at how do you do interdisciplinary, and that's quite a big thing now, looking at how can we cross in different subject areas. And the final one, this is a quite American thing, so basically it's just a student-led, student-centered to put students in a circle and do lots of discussions. You can use a ChatGPT to generate questions or trying to put student answer in to check the effectiveness. So this is one I put into mind, business analytics. So I'm trying to just to come up with one of the questions. It's quite simple and just a simple one to put in. So you can see the case that equality scenario isn't very good. So now one of the challenges is how can we make sure the question we use to test or whatever we're trying to do is effective. There are lots of books now like this. I've just picked this one up from Google. So the secret of getting great answers. Yeah, you have textbook like this, more coming out now. How can you actually get the answers you want? So bear in mind, you can see it, students can read it as well. So that's who gets there first and how to react. So the critical thinking, again, for Bloom's the pyramid, we're mainly looking at the critical thinking skills now. So instant feedback. So you can use a ChatGPT to provide instant feedback. You can, again, using the role play, again, get ChatGPT to produce answers. A lot of these suggestions, unfortunately, are based on GPT-4. So I've got them from very different resources. So one thing I want to reinforce here, I know some of you asked about the ethics. Ethic implications are quite critical for us because everything you put in there, it will go into their training database. There's no secret. So you have to be very careful about what you say. You can encourage students to do whatever they want, but don't put a sensitive information, in particular against the university rules, in particular when they're going into working situation employability, they can't put in company sensitive information. The consequence is much greater than plagiarism. So lots of ethical implications and also how to evaluate the output. So we all know ChatGPT is a hallucination and also deep fakes, lots of fake information. So the ability to evaluate. So I could do another 20 minutes on ethics, but I'll just move on. But that's the thing you need to remind students, the ethical implication, to be careful, including yourself, what put in GPT 3.5, they all become training data. Same university, Macquarie University, so I reference is one of their technology support. He's an expert on assessment as well. So these are the suggestions in terms of the academic integrity, in terms of the references, in terms of kind of how do you clarify expectations. You can't just be kind of vague. And so if you allow students to use ChatGPT, say it clearly and to ask them to provide references. Again, looking at individual universities got different regulations. And one thing we have used in Huddersfield is, I mentioned to some colleagues here already, is we use the Turnitin AI detector tool now, and the results are really very unexpected. We have got 100% cases for quite a few times, and then I know most universities in the UK chose not to turn it on, but I think it's a good practice to see what the AI detector does and how you react to this kind of thing. So I won't go into lots of detail. You can see, again, localization, the case study renewal, trying to use the information as local as possible, and checking references to make that regulation clear and to provide clarifications in your assessment briefs clearly. These are all recommended. So again, you can look at their website, their university learning teaching blogs. So this one is myself. Again, I did see a question relating to this one. So personally, I would say if you have 800, 900 or over 200 student cohorts, you can use the GPT to generate a sort of a kind of a marking criteria. So for every single grade, you can give them detailed summative feedback. So, but remember, it is about students thinking, not just the work. So this is one thing that I sort of just put in and to get them to, okay, so I'm saying to write UK style, you have to say UK because it will come up by default American style. Provide detailed feedback. So you can say for distinction, you've got summative feedback, and you don't have to use it as it is. You can use it as a kind of a format, and then just to build like a template. So if you have to mark 500 students, you just give them here and to tell them where their marks go into individual section, and that way it just speeds things up quite a lot. So just play around. Look at the book I recommended, how to put in a good answer, and you can get some kind of thing out of it, hopefully. So here's the references I've used for many of them. So lots of information available for AI and assessment. So the key thing I would say is really just to go on experiment yourself, because what you have, what you can think in your head is very different from what sort of you can produce from outside. So I'm trying to keep the list short so you can actually see it quite clear. Otherwise, if I put in 20, they're all tiny, so you can't really see anything. Right, so I do hope you find it useful. I'll leave on this slide just so any of you want to take a picture of the references. So, okay. So I hope the presentation is helpful. I actually haven't looked at the time. I don't know if I'm over. All right.
I have
well,
a red card to you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I will pass it on to Peter.
Thank you very much, Christine. Well, we've got time for some questions, so we can take questions from the room. We do have some questions coming up on Padlet that address some of the things Christine's talking about. Do we have any hands? Because I can take some questions from the auditorium. Okay, well, maybe we'll look at Padlet. So one of the questions that I was intrigued about was about the human touch. So if we're using ChatGPT, other chatbots, other AIs to give feedback, is that going to deprive students of the human touch? Are they going to miss something? And really, that's a question for any of the panelists. What do we think about human touch? Do we think human touch is overrated? Do we think students want our human touch?
I would say it's just you can, as I said, you can have the template, and there are always students going to come back to say to ask you to provide additional kind of clarifications, and you can go that way. So the template, I'm suggesting when you're using ChatGPT to make sure it does cover all aspects, looking at your assignment brief, looking at your marking criteria, have you addressed every single thing, and then to look at the marking and to see every, all these major improvements the student needs to do. So this is in a way helpful, but you should only use it as a foundation. The template, it should be customized to fit your individual kind of module. So I think that is a human touch. I'm not suggesting say you just provide something and you just dump it there and then that's it. So I think students in a way can kind of detach, and they're probably better experts than us really in the way of using this kind of AI tool.
The other panelists will be on this.
Just most teachers, lecturers are in short supply, and actually having conversations with ChatGPT can provide a surrogate human touch whilst you wait for your seminar time or your meeting with your lecturer. And I think that's actually quite exciting, because certainly I'm coming from the world of secondary school education, getting time with your teachers to actually look at your work is quite difficult, and you could actually get your students talking to ChatGPT or something else to give you that level of feedback. So when you do go and finally meet your teacher, you have time with them. It's going to be a richer experience than because the AI model will hopefully pick up on some of the simpler mistakes, and then you can focus on the more in-depth stuff with the human.
Ruben, did you want to come over?
Yeah, just very quickly. My worry is that it's not about touch, but it's about voice. So if students start using ChatGPT to do most of the heavy lifting, do their writing skills and thinking skills atrophy, and do they lose their own voice? So ChatGPT output can be fairly bland and formulaic, whereas when you write in your own style, you have your own characteristics, your quirks, your experiences. So if people are really relying on using ChatGPT, they lose their own voice.
Yes, that's something I think would worry a lot of teachers, like how authentic is the voice of the student? Have they learned just to imitate the kinds of outputs that ChatGPT give them? One thing I will say is that some of our students are very resistant to using feedback. So we give them feedback, we all know the complaint. We gave them 15 pages of feedback and they didn't read it. Is there any wonder? I think automated feedback might help students overcome that defensiveness. Right? Sometimes they don't want to read what I think about them. That's how they see it. They don't see me as criticizing their performance. They think I'm somehow criticizing them. And maybe if they knew they were talking to a machine, they'd feel there's less kind of personal animosity on it. It hasn't got my sarcastic voice. They can't hear it and speak to me. So, I do mean that seriously. That it could be a way of overcoming their desire not to read their feedback. But I do take that question about voice. There were a couple of questions on Padlet about the ethics questions, and Christine touched on these. So any data you input into the chatbot now becomes part of its training set. I have seen in some of the books on prompt engineering, how to create good prompts, that you can feed a lot of data into the machine as a way of instructing it what kind of answer you want. Do you have any further thoughts on that question? It's like the dangers or the risks, or what we might say to students to model good behaviour, because if they can't see us doing the right thing, they might do the wrong thing themselves.
I think my answer really is data literacy. You got to train students to let them understand what is the right thing to do. So one of the things in terms of intellectual property, quite difficult to say that word, is to understand who owns the ownership of the outputs produced by generative AI. So this is a quite serious thing that the industries are all discussing this point in particular. So when you come into a kind of working situation, if you use a ChatGPT to create anything, who owns it? The countries have different views. Australians, the UK, US all have very different views. When you work in a kind of a cross culture, cross kind of a country situation. So I think the key thing is we have to teach students what is the right thing to do, what is not acceptable. But to do that, tutors need to be aware of AI literacy ourselves. So I think that's something we have to do first, and then to include AI literacy teaching in our, probably at this stage, will be extracurriculum rather than curriculum.
I can see you drew breath. Prepare.
I mean, it's also, I suppose, quite worrying that one of the big revolutions in recent times, access to knowledge, was the creation of Wikipedia, which is a nice open source platform which everyone owns. We can access that when we want to access it. But we are seeing a lot more as closed environments. So ChatGPT wants to charge you £20 a month to use their system. And there's another point that came up in the Padlet about, should we give it to everyone at ICL? Well, probably yes. If some students are going to be paying for that and getting a better access to that, because some students can't afford it, then you should be providing that. That needs to be a core part of, I suppose, what Imperial is providing. But there is a deeper question here about ethically, how was this data required to train ChatGPT? What are the licenses behind that data? And there's a couple of legal cases being built at the moment against OpenAI because they've been hoovering off information from the internet, which they don't necessarily have the legal right to do. I think the legal case says, and there's a big ethical issue in terms of just how we consider what data copyright means here. And so part of the ethical AI literacy needs to be looking at that too, because it's taken Wikipedia, ingested Wikipedia, but again, Wikipedia is owned by us, but they're now selling this back to Wikipedia.
I think those were great answers. So not much more to add, but legally where this is going globally is just going to be really fascinating to see how it shakes out.
One of the things that was Christine showed Futurepedia, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
The list of all the tools, and I had to scroll down there, and my eye was caught by one that said, "Oh, we've linked GPT to the internet." Now that's quite interesting because the form of GTP that that you normally use hoovered up a lot of information from the internet up until about 2021. I think that's right, but it's not actually talking to the internet right now. So this other tool which says, well, we can combine the two, that's going to raise kind of legal and ethical problems. But I'm not sure, we can't do anything to stop this happening. So if we're thinking about two things, like how do we build these into the way that students are being educated or the way they're teaching themselves? And the second big question, which we're going to come on to later in the session, about how we use it in assessment, we're going to have to be very aware of tools that students have and how skillful they are in using them. We may be panicking over much because I've found students are sometimes not very creative in the way that some of these technologies can be used. So we may think they're more advanced than they are. Nonetheless, I think we should be aware of what they are doing and just how many queries they're putting through. There are other things on the Padlet, which I think will probably be more relevant questions as we move along. So I want to go now to our second speaker. So this is Peter Kemp, lecturer in computing education at King's College London, and he's particularly interested in the transitions from school to university. So what can we expect our students to know when we get here? That's not a tabloid way of summarising your interest.
This is going to be interesting. Do we have access? Definitely. We have access to my slides. Yeah. Easiest way of finding. So I put everything on Google Docs so I could be editing them up to the last minute. Yeah, I think. Let's see what this does. Okay, sorry about that. So my name is Peter Kemp. I come from King's College London, where I run part of the PGCE. So I train computing teachers by trade, and I also do work around assessment at secondary school and sixth form level. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about what sort of assessment is happening at sixth form and secondary level, to give you a bit of an indication of where the students are coming from. And also, I'm going to probably argue that schools are pretty well placed to deal with this right now, because of a very narrow interpretation of assessment. And I know you had a lovely talk yesterday on discovery learning. I'm going to introduce you to some people who do not like discovery learning at all, and I'll try and explain why. But I also think that there are going to be parallels with the discussions that are happening in schools over the last 10 years and the discussions that we're having today. And hopefully we can make the links. And at the end, talking a bit about how I might be changing things in schools. You can see some of the images were taken from DALI, so you can see they were a bit weird. I don't know where that came from. Right, okay, so when ChatGPT came about, the first thing I did was thought, well, okay, what sort of task would you set some students in your school class? And one of them is go and write a program to convert Roman numerals into Latin. Okay, and sure enough, you put it in there, and out pops a ready-made program. Useful. So you then go and do another one, very popular task. Towards Christmas, go get your students to make a Christmas tree using Python. Looks a bit like this, some better, some worse, and it's a good way of bringing together all these lovely Python programming concepts which they've been working on throughout the term. So you go and ask ChatGPT to go and give you an answer to that. Bard is pretty terrible at this actually, but OpenAI seems to be doing a better job. And it gives you a solution that looks pretty right. So you've got, it's importing the right package there. You've got drawing a tree trunk. It seems to be the right color, and it's moving around and doing all sorts of things. The only problem is the actual solution is that, because what we have here is we have a more open-ended question, and with the open-ended question, the AI models are not so good at dealing with them. If it's a nice closed question, they're actually pretty good because there's loads of people, for some other reason, who have written solutions to converting a Roman numeral into a decimal number. So there's loads of examples to learn from. It's pretty good at giving you the solution for that. And you're seeing within schools this debate about whether we go down the no AI route. We don't want to touch AI because it's too dangerous. Everything's going to be AI, so we don't teach any programming at all. And somewhere in the middle. And I think, certainly I am in somewhere in the middle on this, because this is not a good solution to the question that I've said. Not to say that in sometime in the future we could give a better solution, but if you want your students to be good programmers, they need to be able to use this tool, and they need to be able to adapt it to do something that they want to do, which means they've got to understand the basics. So the basics are really important for them to be able to interrogate, interpret, and critique and adapt these AI solutions that are being given to you. And I think that applies to pretty much any field. If you're given a solution, you don't just say, oh, that's the answer. You want to be able to be critical with that. And I think, that's very clear from this. And there's a lovely blog post I came out a couple of days ago, Professor Becky Allen over at Sussex, who, and this came from, obviously, as everyone does nowadays, typing into ChatGPT, they recommended this title, Training the Human Arbiters of Taste and Truth. And in the broadest sense, education should be there to train the human arbiters of taste and truth. That when we get these models, we need to decide what's tasteful, what's nice, what's beautiful, what's correct, and truth. How are we going to actually get us to do the thing that we wanted to go and do? So I think that's a nice model to be thinking about. But let's give you a bit of background now to what's been going on in schools over the last 10 years. You are probably aware of the various education ministers who come and go, but this man here is the power behind the throne. He's been in the Department of Education for most of the time over the last 10 years. His name is Nick Gibb. So if you want to go and learn about what education policy is doing at school, well, that's your interest, it's mine, but there you go. This is the man to go and look at what his thinking is. And he's heavily influenced by this guy called E.D. Hirsch. And E.D. Hirsch argues that the knowledge-rich curriculum is the best curriculum. So no discovery, but less discovery learning, more direct instruction, teaching facts, teaching knowledge that children can then use as a basis to go and build other things. Okay, you can't do discovery learning unless you actually understand the basics of what you're going to discover. And I'm sure that was covered yesterday. But we've got, so I stripped out a couple of bits from the speech that we gave back in 2021 before the AI revolution that we're currently going through. And I quite like this last phrase here. The ability to just Google it is highly dependent on what a person has stored in their long-term memories. The idea, if you just Google something and you see the answer, oh, it's got an answer, there we go, I'll print it off and hand it in. Well, no, you need to actually understand what it's saying. You need to be able to critique this. And so you could replace the ability to just Google with the ability to use some AI model. It needs to have some long-term memory to critique this and to understand what's going on. So this is the policy change, or the policy focus space we've had in education over the last 10 years. And what did this mean? Well, we've moved away from discovery learning largely. We've moved away from coursework, sadly. Now, because we are using this model here, what makes a good assessment? Well, it's something that's valid and reliable. And you can see this bit, again, that's coming from Dolly, you can probably tell, Alad and Deal. I presume they're not actually words. So you've got tests, you want to test what you think is testing, and you want to test that's reliable, consistently measuring performance across individuals, across years and so on. So the easiest way to do that is having a nice closed exam. Okay, don't let teachers judge how well a student's going. Because if you remember a couple of years ago during the pandemic, we had the mutant algorithm, which ruined everyone's grades. I think quite rightly, it was a very bad application of AI. So we went to teacher allocated grades, which arguably were even worse. So you have some schools where all the grades shot up, everyone did really, really well, the best grades we've ever had in the country. Not because the students are the best students we've ever had in the country, but because teachers are very unreliable in how they assess. So closed exams standardized exams seem to be the best way of doing that, which seems a bit sad. So one of the examples is this guy here. So this is Prince Harry. You've not met Prince Harry before. And he was accused back in 2005 of his art teacher doing his coursework. I think the case was never quite settled. I'm not really sure what happened. I think he got, it wasn't the case. But how can we be sure that if it's a piece of open coursework, it's not Harry's teacher, his dad, his grandma, his brother doing, right? We don't know. So the easiest solution is, again, chop off the coursework, because the coursework is open to manipulation. And we saw the same thing with computer science. I know many of you will have some elements of coding. This is imperial, maybe elements of coding in all sorts of different subjects. So when Gove got rid of all the coursework, he left it in computer science. Brilliant, that's what we need. We need students to do long, substantial piece of work which they can get to know computing properly. But they set up a model where they had a set task, and you could do it across a week, but that week could take place in any week of 2 months. So what happens? The first people do it, upload what the question is, and they upload what the answer is. So then if you're doing it in the last week of that 2-month window, you can see the answer to the question and you're fine to basically print it off. So that went horribly wrong. And we now move to computer science in secondary GCSE as a subject which is tested entirely through closed exams, which is very sad and useless for computer exams. So for computer science, yes, but I suppose I was kind of one of those people there. Not useless, but it's not a great way of assessing somebody's understanding of computer science. So here we go, quick summary. And so with a computer bent here, the old SC qualifications, large amounts, it was large percentage coursework, and they were seen as easy options because again, you didn't know who was doing them. Very high pass rates, very good grades. And then Ofqual set up in 2008. So this was a Quango that survived the bonfire of the Quangos back in 2013, but a Quango that is there to try and make sure exams can cope, the exam system can cope with teachers and parents and AI and copying off the internet. Go scraps most of the coursework in GCSEs, so no coursework in maths, no coursework in science anymore. It's all exam based. And then we can see GCSE goes to exam enrollment. What does this all have to do with AI? Well, hopefully you can see the parallel here. If we don't know what we're testing, or don't know who we're testing, can we say it's valid and reliable? That's really difficult. So the solution of the DFE was to move everything to paper-based all examinations. And I don't think that we want to be doing that because we have something called authenticity. And I'm going to look at authenticity in 2 ways. I'm sorry, my slides are nowhere as pretty as but it's a bit of a mess here. But we've got authenticity in 2 ways. We've got authenticity in terms of the task, something real and meaningful. I mean, is building a Christmas tree probably a bit more real and meaningful for a student than converting Roman numerals? Probably, yes. That's the more authentic task, I would say, because they're going to go, oh, that's more fun. I want to get involved with that. I want to, experiment and then expand this. But also authenticity in terms of the process and the environment. So if your students are programming, even if you don't have it on campus, they're going to be using this stuff at home. So when I might do my kind of bad R scripting, because I do most of my work in R, I'm using Stack Overflow all the time. Or I want to use GitHub Pilot, but it's not quite integrated with RStudio. But I want to be using these tools. This is the background that I want to have. If you start to test them in an environment which doesn't support the environment they've got at home, it's going to be a bit of a disconnect, a bit of an inauthentic environment. So what does it look like? This is the GCSE here. Write on paper this algorithm. Well, I mean, that feels pretty inauthentic to me. It's about 30 letters of someone's surname and 2 letters of their first name. Doesn't that sound exciting and inspiring? So you've got a task there which seems a bit unauthentic. You write a program on paper with pencil, again, quite authentic because I have a conversation with the computer when I write code. It tells me that it's wrong and I have to go and fix it. You can't do that because on paper, but you do have some on-screen exams. But again, these are not linked to the internet in any way. You can use an IDE to support you, but they're inauthentic because they're not linked to the internet. That's a bit sad. That's the GCSE. A-level, we've got an on-screen exam as well, which is good. And you've also got a project here. 20% of the A-level, if you have A-level computer scientists coming in, always talk to them about their A-level coursework because it's a wonderful part. It's the best part of the course. They do amazing things. And you see at the bottom, the investigating machine learning algorithms when they're 16, 17, 18. Lovely. But my fear is here with this lovely project work, very open-ended, very authentic, that the government might go, sorry, oh no, there you go, might stamp on that and get rid of it at some point. But it's currently still there. So yeah, value it when you can. So I've kind of covered all this. And the point I made talking a little while ago is just about the bottom one. So we need to make sure that we have an equitable platform for everyone. And if these AI tools have become really kind of closed shop, really expensive things, as a university, we need to be thinking about how we support students in using the best possible tools, because some students will be doing that anyway. So you want to give them the best tools. Otherwise, one student will be getting an advantage over another student. And this is my rather messy summary, but I think coursework is absolutely essential. We need to have some elements of work that they do outside closed exams because of the authenticity issue. It's what's going to fire them up, the passion. It's what's going to give them an opportunity to do this. And if you make it authentic, hopefully they're more likely to make it unique, and it's going to be their work. And if they have conversations with ChatGPT and other things, that's fine too. But I think we need to keep these things. And we've already mentioned, because except the documented use of AI. So if they're using AI, they should be explaining how they use that, because that's now part of the process of what they're doing. And if you do have narrow problems, don't expect them to do that in kind of closed room environments if they're not sitting in a closed room environment. You probably want to be moving this to closed exams because they'll find a deterministic narrow AI to make solutions, and they'll just use those, and you won't know the difference. And so Vygotsky, he kind of came up, well, very influential in teacher education, all education, Russian pedagogue from the 1930s. He talks about the zone of proximal development that we learn in collaboration with others, basically. And as I was also saying, we learn through dialogue. It's a dialogical process that we talk to people, they give us feedback, they correct things, they give us new ideas, they tell us something's not right, they point us in new directions. And AI can do a lot of that formative work. So then the conversation that we have then is going to be, where we're seeing really polished work, rather than, as I'm sure many of you, having sentences that don't make any sense. I mean, I spend a lot of time reading essays and actually this needs to be completely rewritten. If the AI got in there earlier, I could actually have a conversation about the content rather than the structure of these things. And then finally, well, one side of this, but arbiters of taste and truth. I think Becky Alan's got a lovely take on this, and we do need to have knowledge. I mean, we can't just jettison knowledge. We still need to be teaching these fundamentals, because it's the fundamentals that we use to go across the other things. And one of the things that Ruben mentioned was, won't AI make my students less able? There's very little data on this at the moment, but a paper came out a couple of about 2 months ago. And it's looking at programming. And again, it's for this kind of younger age group, but it found that those with AI, 2.15 increased completion rates and 1.8 times higher scores. Okay, well, we kind of expect that. They've got AI support. But the interesting thing is the next bit. Was not decreasing performance on manual code modification tasks. So actually, they were just as good as the other students, the ones that have been using AI to support their coding. Okay, so that's a small study, and there'll be a lot more coming this way. But I suppose it's not as depressing as maybe maybe it could. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Peter's talk went into important areas of what we're assessing for, and that whole thing about is the assessment reliable and is it valid, might seems undermine other education aims we might want, like authenticity. And one of the things we might like to think about is whether you can have an authentic assessment and still be sure that it's reliable and valid. I don't understand why this polarity has been set up, but it does seem that it has. I think what we'll do is we'll move on to our third speaker as well, Ruben, and then we can pick up all the things that are happening on Padlet and also some of your questions in the room. So, Ruben, would you like to speak there? And then we will open up for questions. Thank you. And keep using Padlet, please.
It's a pleasure to be here. So this is called Chatbots and AI, a new frontier in higher education. I'm mostly going to be talking about ChatGPT, but it's illustrated by DALL-E. For those of you who don't know, DALL-E is named after Wally and Salvador Dali. And in the spirit of that, this piece of artwork here is titled Holding Back the Incoming Tide, where the incoming tide is AI. All right, so I'm a marine biologist. So you might be thinking, what's a marine biologist doing here, coming and talking at an educational conference? Well, I wrote this. I think it's a pretty cool paper. You guys read it? It's called Chatting and Cheating. And it's with my colleagues, Dr. Pete Cotton and Debbie Cotton. And when we published it, it picked up quite a decent amount of press. We got this Washington Post article. Professors published a paper on AI with a plot twist. And the plot twist is that ChatGPT wrote this paper. And we only revealed this at the end, hence the plot twist. And we said at the end, we structured it really weirdly. We put the conclusion and the discussion after the conclusion. So as the alert reader may have guessed, everything up to this point was written by GPT. And then we say our intent in taking this approach is to highlight how sophisticated these models have become. So how did I get onto this? Let's go back to marine biology. This piece of artwork is called Bioluminescence Sheds Light, shed light being the most important thing. I originally asked this to produce an anglerfish with a bioluminescent bulb illuminating a student essay, and instead it made a crustacean with flame underwater. So I don't know, got a little bit of catching up to do. So we had essays on bioluminescence for our first years, and my colleague Pete put this essay into GPT, and he sent the responses around to the rest of the faculty. He says, so what do you think of these 500-word essays? And I read it and I thought, it's pretty bland. I'd been messing around with GPT. I kind of noticed the output and I thought, that's probably written by GPT. But then I saw this bit right at the end. Oh, we've got a touch screen. Okay. So this bit right at the end. While much is known about bioluminescence, there is still much that scientists do not understand, and ongoing research is helping to shed more light on this beautiful aspect of the natural world. I thought, that's pretty sophisticated for an AI. Am I wrong? Was that student? Was that GPT? Turns out it was GPT. And I got talking to Pete, and I just mentioned to him in this email chain, how do you feel about co-authoring a paper that's written by ChatGPT on the challenges that academia faces with AI? So that's basically how this paper was born. And the way we did it, prompt engineering, we would basically put a prompt into GPT, get it to spit out a response. The responses we liked, we then incorporate into the paper. So I asked it here, come up with a title. And this was the response. And we'll see number 2, chatting and cheating. And we basically structured this entire paper with all of these prompts and then took the stuff that we liked. Sometimes we'd amalgamate it, see what it came up with. So what happens? So this is the timeline of the paper. 3rd of January, it was conceptualized. 6 days later, we'd written it, we'd uploaded the preprint to edArchive, we'd submitted the manuscript. It took about 6-7 weeks, and it was originally rejected from AEHE. And we got the reviews back. One reviewer really liked it. One reviewer pretty much trashed it. If that reviewer's in the audience, I don't know. I'm very sorry right now. The reviewer read, I read this paper assuming it was written by a human, only to find it was written by GPT. The authors tried to prove that a solid academic paper can be produced by GPT. They failed to achieve this goal. Next thing they said, this was the second biggest point they disagreed with. This is not an example of plagiarism. I politely disagree. So the first point, if you didn't or weren't able to tell that it was written by ChatGPT, does that not demonstrate our point? I believe so. The second thing, plagiarism. Well, here's the editor of Science writing an article. ChatGPT is fun, but it's not an author. He says, for science journals, the word original is enough to signal that text written by GPT is not acceptable. It is, after all, plagiarized from ChatGPT. So yes, I think it is plagiarism. Round two. So after it was rejected, we submitted it to IETI. Reviewers liked it. One of the reviewer diametrically opposed to the first reviewer. A powerful piece to demonstrate firsthand what GPT is capable of. We were delighted to hear this. And then a couple of weeks later, the proofs were circulated. It was basically published immediately, and it's already got, so it got 50 citations in the first 100 days. This is not to brag. So to take home from this, I had a postdoc advisor in the States who used to say, when you've got a really good idea, you've got to pee on that fire hydrant. So it's kind of like marketing territory. So with this idea, it's really essential that we uploaded it to a preprint server because somebody else is going to get this idea. When it's out there, it's out there. Using and not attributing large language models is plagiarism. ChatGPT cannot be a co-author. Lots of people are using it as a co-author at the moment. You can't do that. If you actually ask ChatGPT, you ask it, can you be a co-author? ChatGPT will say no. So the reason why I cannot agree to the final submitted article, I cannot take responsibility for it. Last point, or two more points, sorry. It can be quite sophisticated. We got this published. All of the reviewers admitted that they were not aware that GPT had written this paper. So it is sophisticated. Things are moving really rapidly. So 50 citations in less than 100 days, that's spectacular. This is going to be the highest cited paper I have. And in this period of time, so not bragging, in this period of time, ChatGPT was launched, 3.5 was launched, 4 has now come out. This is that wave that we're trying to hold back on that first slide. This is crazy. So the chat is out the bag. Edward Monk, the cat is out the bag. This is Google metrics now, and GPT was launched, 3.5 was launched 27th of November 2022. It's had all these peaks since where it's got all of this press. And I want to point out right now that in the first week, 6 days after GPT was launched, 1 million unique users. 6 weeks after it's launched, 500 million users. So the chat is out of the bag. This is all old data now, so this is a few months out of date, so this is going to look even crazy. It's had millions of news articles, blogs, social media posts, and it's everywhere around the world. And I think a really useful case study here is to compare this to Facebook. Facebook was launched in 2004. The mantra of Facebook, move fast and break things. Okay, it took Facebook 1 year to get 1 million unique users. It took them 6 years to get 500 million. GPT, 5 days and 5 weeks, respectively. The West, or the entire world, hasn't really got to grips with regulation of social media. And we've seen how disruptive that has been. It's changed the world. Are we going to learn those lessons with GPT? Are we going to learn those lessons with large language models? Or are we going to face similar problems or new problems? So GPT causes a splash. Artificial intelligence jumps into a pool. Splash. Okay, these are ways in which GPT has actually caused a splash. Just a few different examples. Worldwide reports of students using it to cheat. Banned by New York State, which is the biggest education, school block in the US. So I've got teachers protesting calculators here. GPT listed as a co-author in numerous publications. And then you've got these journals coming out and issuing guidelines. And then we have GPT passing university admissions, medical exams, and law exams. We have this case where a judge in Pakistan actually decided bail on a rape case using GPT. So the ways in which this is getting utilized, you know, we've seen the spread of it worldwide. We've seen how many people are using it. We're going to get some really creative and different applications for how to use this software. Okay, this is Van Gogh contemplating a future in which his art is imitated by artificial intelligence. I call it a universe of possibilities here. I'm going to give one pretty concrete example of how GPT can be used. I got GPT to write a song on the style of Beyonce, and it includes a rap battle between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. I'm the Prime Minister, I'm the one in charge. I'm the Chancellor, I'm the one with the plan, etc. I got it to design the actual code for a song, for a pop song, did it pretty competently. And then got it to provide a series of titles for this music. I note Betrayal of the Nation, The End of Trust. I didn't do anything to engineer this, I just put the lyrics in, the lyrics that GPT came up with. Pretty revealing, right? Make a music video. It does it pretty competently. It finishes with both of them smiling and looking proud. Write a budget and produce a script for the film video, so for the music video, does it pretty competently. And then translate it into multiple different languages because this is going to be a global hit, does it pretty competently. Why am I doing this? Well, music is integral to the human experience. I think if you go a few years back, people have said computers can never come up with a hip-hop song. It is one of the biggest industries in the UK. It's one of our major exports. And it's not inconceivable that we're going to get to a future where programs like this can make a song by analysing all the music on YouTube. Think about what Bard has. It's owned by Google, right? Coming up with that song, producing it in multiple different languages, making the music video, etc. What does that mean for this massive industry that employs so many people? Really interesting questions. All right, so the future landscape of GPT. What does it mean for students? What does it mean for admissions when a student can basically use GPT to write a CV or a cover letter, and we have nothing to base that against apart from their school grades? What does that mean? Coursework. How's it going to change coursework? Plagiarism. We're going to have to deal with this. Writing skills. We touched on that earlier. Are these writing skills going to atrophy? What does that mean? For us, for academics, what does it mean for hiring? I've got an interest. So my sister, she was holding some interviews a couple of weeks ago. The person she was interviewing asked, "Do you mind if I just type the questions out just so that I can have a record of them?" And she was really impressed with this person's answers. Really impressed with them. And then she got a little bit suspicious because she knows I've been doing some of this stuff. So I just told her, just put the questions into GPT and see what answers you got. Lo and behold, this person was using GPT to answer these questions during an interview. So if the admissions process has been tweaked using GPT and people are then using Zoom to interview, what does that mean for the types of people that we're getting into university? Personnel, job security. This has the potential to replace a lot of jobs. What does that mean for us as academics? What does that mean for us in our careers? Publications. I think I've already competently demonstrated that this can be used to publish, right? It's published. Degree relevance. Are we teaching students, or are we giving them degrees for something that's going to become irrelevant and for which they do not have any future career prospects? Possibly. Society. Is this a revolution tool, or is it useful like a calculator? What's going to be the impact of this? Do we prohibit, like New York State? Do we adopt? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? It's a revolutionary technology. There are going to be winners and losers. And then this big thing at the end, regulation. We're going to need to regulate this. Just quickly to finish off. So industrial revolution killed primary jobs being farming, stuff that you dig out of the ground, raw materials. We saw the advent of secondary industries, which is where you made stuff out of primary industries, out of those raw materials. Again, industrial revolution kills that. Look at that curve dropping. It gave birth to tertiary, which is knowledge. Okay, and then post-industrial, we have quaternary, which is things like science, advanced engineering. What's ChatGPT going to do to these green and blue curves? Open question, something really important we need to consider. Final thing I'll finish on my favourite article, William Blake. This is, did we eat the forbidden fruit of knowledge, or is it going to eat us? Thank you very much. I recommend, this is the publication, please read it. And then if anybody wants to contact me about this stuff, this is my contact details. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have about 20, 25 minutes for questions, perhaps slightly less than that, because I'll ask the panel to do a summing up. We've got lots of questions on the Padlet. Do we have any from the floor? Anyone in the room? Yes, gentleman in the back row, please.
So really a question for a second speaker in the main, I think. Vygotsky, as I understand it, was primarily interested in child development. He talks about the zone of proximal development. He's talking about children achieving at beyond what you would think their competence ought to be given their developmental stage. We're in a slightly different situation in universities. We can mostly assume that that our students don't have much developing in the sense of kind of growing their brains to do. So we're more interested in them acquiring competences that they are already capable of but haven't got yet. But in those circumstances, it's not clear to me that Vygotsky's conclusion survives. In other words, if they only ever work collaboratively, such as collaboratively with AI, they never take the stabilizers off the bike. Do we reach a stage? Do we know that? Can we have faith that we'll reach a stage that they would be able to cycle unaided? Do you see what I mean? I mean, we've got to. I often feel this when people talk about Vygotsky and Piaget in the context of pedagogy, when we're taking theories of child development and kind of applying them to pedagogy. I'm not sure how many of the conclusions survive, but I wondered if you had a view on that.
Peter, before you answer that, let's collect up a few questions so we can see the kind of sentiment in the room. So I saw some other hands go up as well. Yes, I think it's Magdalena at the very back.
I think AI has incredible potential, but I really can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I got your name wrong. That's why I apologize.
That's all right. That's all right. I wouldn't have been able to see anybody from this myself. No, I think AI has a huge amount of potential, but there's also a lot to be worried about. For example, there are many good examples of how to incorporate AI in our teaching and the students' learning. But I really worry about the students' voice, and I really worry about this thing called humanity and humanism, because if we're using if we are all using the same data sets, I think we're going to start producing this blandness of the answers that we get, right? And the other thing that I worry about is exactly the ease with which we can produce papers and information. We're already battling this wave of fake information. But now if we just start populating the internet with lots and lots and lots of produced, invented articles, then a lot of what we're going to be producing is based on things that are not real. And I have no idea how we're going to be able to scrutinize this and how we're going to be able to really deal with this. And I think that the AI is evolving at a crazy pace. And I think that a lot of the ways we assess our students really have no validity, because we're no longer evaluating their knowledge, but rather what the machine has been able to do. So I think this really is a crisis point for us. And it's one that really questions, first of all, why we assess, how we assess, and in many ways what the higher education really is for. I mean, we've commercialized to a certain extent education so much that we've put in second place really educating. So we're giving degrees rather than educating people. And I think we have to go back to basics, where actually we try to help the students develop a sense of love for learning and learning for the sake of developing themselves, other than just doing the exams to get a good mark and then a good job. Because I think a lot of employers are already disregarding the marks in college because they don't think that they are as valid as they used to be. So I have no answers here, but I think this is a really important discussion, and I'm really grateful for all the views.
Okay, can we take another question, please? Yes, please.
Hi, what my question is a bit directed to Peter, but as a general thought, it was very interesting, the sit-ups, and I agree, and I like the sentence of we need to create arbitrage of space-time too. But focusing on computing, because I'm in the computing department, we actually do assess our students in classrooms. So we have a computer in 3 hours to do an assessment, which I think that it's good and important, because focusing in computing is not only to learn the language, but there are two main things. One is the language itself, that you can have the language R, C, C++, and you need to understand the syntax. But also, which is, I think is crucial, is to understand the requirements, i.e., you have a problem that is defined in high-level language like English, and you have to translate this language to a computer language using whatever language is R, C, or C++. And this is, at the moment, I don't see that ChatGPT can give you that knowledge. So you can say, like, write me a programming such and such, but if I give you a problem, write me you the problem in the language. And this is something that is very important to teach students. And I think that, for example, exams in classroom in computing, I'm saying focusing in computing is quite valid to assess these skills. I agree in courseworks. I think that they are very important, but at the end of the day, it's also important to try to test some skills. And for example, in computing, this is one way.
Okay, so we have 3 questions here. So let's see if the panel can come back to some of these. So to remind everyone, one was about Vygotsky. So if we're talking about university students, what is that proximal development? What's that next thing beyond that we think our students might need to reach, since Vygotsky was talking about children? This question about what the validity of assessment is and what we're assessing for. So at the moment, we want to know, have you learned something and did you do this? You know, is that the right approach to assessment, or should we be doing something else in higher education? And the third one was about this interesting question about specifying the problem. So GPT can outcode anybody, probably. The thing it may not be able to do is to take a high-level specification of a problem and then work with that directly. That might actually give hope to the people who are worried about GPT. If you're worried about GPT and you think it can't handle high-level human discourse, that may be a good thing. So I don't know if any of the panel would like to pick up on any of those ideas.
Yes. So the first one with Vygotsky, I mean, you're absolutely right. He is talking about child development, and also Piaget is talking about different stages of development in children. But going back to my point before, my talk really about this idea that a lot of learning takes place through dialogue. So we have dialogues with other people, and they get us to think about things in other ways. And you know, the importance of the seminar, the importance of tutorials when you're at university. These, I think, are absolutely crucial in how we develop students. And so there's only possible development. zone of proximal development is obviously very, very important if you're trying to get a student or a child to learn something new and then to move out of that zone to the next stage. But what the AI model is doing is, I suppose, mimicking that in a slight sense, but providing the seminar, providing the feedback. Not, I don't think, as good as we would do in the seminar or we would do in the tutorial, but it's the preparation level for them to go and get the most out of that tutorial or out of that seminar. And once the second part of your question was around how do we make sure that they move on, because they might just get so leaning so much on ChatGPT, so GPT, you say. That's a really important thing. That if you rely too much on this tool and you're not quite sure if it's telling you what the truth is, it can be a bit scary that you're going to have people in positions of power relying on a tool which is hallucinating answers and things like that. But that's where the human factor comes in. So I think it's a bit like a spell checker, right? In the past, I'm sure we would have marked students' essays down if they spelled things, but we don't do that anymore. So the spelling is corrected by whichever tool that they're using. And the next stage that we see now is these AI tools will help structure what they're doing and give preliminary criticism, and then the movement on is for us as human beings to actually interpret that, and then for them to realise that it's a human task, it's a real task, so that's important. I'm sorry, did we get that?
I mean, that segues into the question of the authentic assessment. So you might have the chatbot or whatever it is helping you to structure the task or even giving you feedback. But then at some point, we want to know if the students have learned something, or do we? Is that a false question? So at the moment, we want to know if our graduates have met learning outcomes and we structure assignments in a particular way. What can we do to make that authentic and to find out if they have learned something worthwhile? I mean, I think, development of Anna's question, the second question you heard, what does the panel think about that? Are you persuaded by the various tips and tricks you've seen, like from Macquarie University? Do you think those would help us to provide authentic assessments in higher education?
So I think the second question seems to looking at the more of a writing academic papers or research, that sort of thing. I'm not trying to promote, but I'm doing a QA session to the end of next month, just focusing on how undergraduate and postgraduates are going to use this type of tool to improve their academic research. So my personal view is I've wrote a blog post on this one already. So I think personally, I'm writing a systematic review paper at the moment, and we all know first screening is such a time-consuming, and it's just a long process. So to be fair, if I think AI or some kind of generative AI tool can help me with the first process of screening papers, I think that could speed things up to help me focus on filtering out individual papers, looking at the paper that's being selected. So focusing on synthesizing and comparing what kind of results are come out. So you can use it as helping you doing the basic kind of finding literature review papers. And I'm not saying relying on it 100%, but you can use it to help you do most of that kind of a searching. We're already using search filter functions anyway. So what's the difference as a generative AI compared to that? Just like the newbie, that similar type of thing. So then you can focus on the page where the most critical page is your finding and your data analysis part. You can focus on that. For students as well, you can get them to do the critical thinking part like that. You can actually give them the material and to say, how can you critique what kind of views, and you can actually run it through ChatGPT to look at different output and to get students to rewrite, to improve, to actually evaluate their critical thinking skills. I'm not saying to use it to produce everything from scratch, and we shouldn't really, in a way, rejecting it completely, because industry is already using the long form, using it to produce legal documents, and companies using it to writing different letters. So what's the difference from students using it to do the basic thing? As long as if we know what we're trying to, again, to assess students, to look at the learning outcome, to address the highest learning outcomes, as I said, come back to Bloom's framework to look at rather than just the factor checking. If the factor checking can be done easily, then I don't see any problem because that's what they're going to get into doing it. At work, at the industry, the people are trained. How can I best use ChatGPT to produce the basic documents I need, and then I can improve it. Nothing wrong with it. And yes, lots of data goes into, I think one of the questions mentioned, lots of data goes into it will make the training data set better, but that's how things are happening. It's like Google search, like Bing search. Nobody questions saying, oh, we search a lot of things and they still using training data to help us to, to actually resolve the training result to make it more kind of user-centered. It's the similar type of thing. It just, in the end, it's a tool. It can't really read your mind. It doesn't generate the meaningful thing. All it does is understanding what's your structure and trying to come up with something. It can't think. That's a key thing. It cannot think. So that's the key thing we need to remember. They can't reflect human, not for a long while. That's my answer.
I mean, that relates to the third question from the colleague from the Department of Computer Science. You can specify the problem at a high level, and that's the human input. And, that's often the hard thing for people who work in technology to actually, I ask you what your problem is, and I try and convert that into something I can solve. And that's the thing that the machine will find it more difficult to do. And so maybe our assessments all need to be directed to all of those things which require creativity and what's the other word I'm looking for? Critique. Now, all universities will say in their specs and in their module descriptions that that's what they're doing. We're trying to assess creativity and critique. But I wonder how many of our assessments, if we did a review of them, would stand up to a test of whether we think ChatGPT could handle that or not. I mean, colleagues, do you have any either summarising thoughts or closing thoughts? We only have 9 more minutes, but I think you should collect up anything that has occurred to you either during the seminar or something you didn't say that you wanted to bring up, or even something that's come up on the panel. Question there you'd like to ask.
I'll just address. Do you mind if I just address what you said about creativity?
Yes, please.
I would just caution people not to say ChatGPT cannot do, or any AI cannot do X, Y, and Z at the moment. I think there were elements of creativity in my presentation, making the song, producing the artwork. This is only going to get better and better and better. It's only going to learn the more we use it and the more it's unleashed on the internet. So please, when we say it cannot do this yet, what I will say.
But I don't think there's any harm. I mean, we're still going to go back to programming. We're still going to teach the basics of programming because it's important. It's important to understand these basic things, and for students to understand these basic things because they need to do that to start to critique on a higher level. But it's, there was Leavis, F.R. Leavis, literary critic back in the 1970s, said that the computer cannot have responsibility. Responsibility is a very human thing. And we need to look at everything that's produced as, the responsibility for that lies with us who are using it and people who are creating it. And we need to be able to critique what's being made, because if we just take these things as obviously a finished product, I'm going to run my rail network based on some system that ChatGPT is written. You're lining yourself up some big problems in the future. And you made a very good point about assessment. I'm certainly not opposed to closed room examinations in front of the computer. I don't want to do the paper-based math. And most kids are doing that. But there is a value as well with learning syntax, with going through the process of learning those basic facts too. But I assume you give them an IDE, which is going to flag up, syntax errors, and it's what that turns into. Whether the example that I used on the board, they start to write a statement and it then completes half the statement. And that might be something that we incorporate, but we still are going to have the basic facts there, and the conversion of problems into computer code. Well, it's just it's abstraction. We need to talk to computers in a way that they can understand to build the structure, which we can then fill in. Or, you know, we need to get better at talking to a computer to build the blocks that we can then slot together. And you're probably going to have to do some work to get them slot together perfectly, because what it currently produces isn't great. It's going to get better, but there's always going to be the need to tweak on the edges. And then the expertise is about this, you know, arbiters of truth and what I'm trying to say as well. But you know, I think, yeah, we need the basics. We still need the basics. It's always going to be there, but we just need to recognise that this is going to be taking over more of the roles that we've got.
And it may, if we can find the assessments we want that we think are tapping into questions like creativity and critique, that means that every other kind of assessment we want to do, including those MCQ questions, like, you know, can you pick the right answer that you remember from the list, that can be part of the kind of formative or mastery type education. We don't perhaps need to assess that formatively. I think, though, we are going to have to educate not just students, but ourselves on the dangers of over-reliance. And our own Thomas Lancaster, who I don't think is in the room, from the Department of Computer Science, has said, imagine a scenario where a patient was using ChatGPT to self-diagnose and then believed the answer and then followed the advice, which may not have been good advice. You know, and we don't have to catastrophize like that with our students. We don't have to say, well, if you write the wrong answer down, you could kill yourself. But, you know, it's if you like, an illustration of how unreliable the outputs can be unless you scrutinize them. But then we perhaps have to help the students to understand what it means to critique the answer they get. It's all very well saying, don't believe the output, but what is the student supposed to do next if we've told them that using ChatGPT is a good way of structuring their assignment or answering some questions? Any other closing thoughts or Pablo questions?
Just a quick point, I won't say too much. So I think everybody covered. So the assessment strategy, I think the assessment is going to have a revolution pretty much now. So every university is doing that. And then we also, just like any other technology, we need to think about industry. What does the industry want us to be? In the end, it's industry driven. And also student-staff collaboration to ask the students what have they been doing with ChatGPT, bring them in to do staff-student collaboration, to get them to show us what they have experienced, and they often do better things than us. So I think it's a positive way to look at it, because we can't get rid of ChatGPT. So we've just got to learn to live with it. So thank you.
Learn to live with it, find ways of outwitting it. Okay. We have reached the end of the session. I will hand over to Camille, but one thing that the panelists all said before we came to the meeting was we would like to kind of feedback. We'd like there to be some proceedings in this meeting. So we will take some of the things that have come up. We'll take some of the questions that are on Padlet and try and produce a response, because we couldn't in an hour and a half solve some of these questions, these anxieties. So we will try and come back to everyone who registered for this session with some of the unresolved, unanswered questions that have come. So I will now hand back to our chair. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And a huge thanks to our panel and everything you brought to kind of kick us off and give us a lot of, you know, really fruitful information to reflect on today. So thank you, Christine, Peter, and Ruben, and Jeffrey for chairing, keeping us all organized. I do want to encourage you to attend the sessions that start now. And to give us a bit more space, all of the sessions that we're going to be in room 122 are going to be in this theater today. So stick around if you, so the upcoming one for Mike Tennant on curiosity,